Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited today to have Andy Dunn here, who is a co-founder of the menswear brand Bonobos and served as CEO until its 2017 acquisition by Walmart. As an investor, he's backed more than 80 startups. He's a graduate of Northwestern and Stanford's MBA program, and also serves on the boards of Monica and Andy, an organic baby apparel company founded by his sister, Monica Royer, tech social good nonprofit Raised by Us, and the Network for Executive Women. In May, he released a memoir titled Burn Rate, Launching a Startup and Losing My Mind, which explores the intersection of entrepreneurship and mental illness, and where he also shares his bipolar diagnosis. And his next business venture, called Pumpkin Pie, is a social media app currently in beta that aims to detoxify digital culture. I'm so thrilled to have Andy here to share his personal journey of perseverance, along with ways to tackle stigma in the business world. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
So excited. I guess I'll start with the question, how did you come to this very vulnerable space that allowed you to write the book, and tell us about people's reactions after the release of your book?
Yeah, I was tired of being ashamed. I was tired of holding on to a part of myself and my story that was hidden from plain sight. And I also felt, it's not that useful to have this thing that we can't talk about that is just hard enough to deal with without the silence and the shame. And so I felt like by telling the story, I could do so on my own terms. I could expunge that shame. Shame is what is unspeakable. It's what we can't talk about. And so to speak about it and talk about it felt like a way to kind of get what I talk about in the book as this ghost out of my system, put it into, the light of day. And it's been just an incredible 2 months. What I thought was this thing that was going to be a disconnecting thing with everyone else, that was somehow going to make me different in an unrecognizable way, paradoxically has been an incredible way to connect with so many people. It's an issue in every family. Every family has a story. Every person has a story of some kind, diagnosis or not. So I'm so glad I got a chance to share my story, and I wish it for everyone to be fully known in their personal lives and also their professional lives, because it feels like something that we can't talk about at all at work. And it turns out that's not true. I think we can. I think we're learning how as a society, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It's a coming out movement of sorts.
Yes, absolutely. Back to the book, walk us through that day in 2016 when you had the psychotic break. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so 2016, it was one of these things where I guess they say mania, can be triggered by good things, particularly in my case, untreated and unmedicated bipolar disorder lurking underneath. And then I had this wonderful thing that was happening, which is I was marching down the path to getting engaged to an amazing woman, my now wife, Manuela. And I was really excited about that moment. And so over the course of a week while she was out of town, I was out sleeping a little, drinking, having fun. And over the course of the week, started sleeping less and less, staying out late, burning the candle at both ends. And by the time she came back, I wasn't in a good place, and she wasn't really aware of it, because I had mentioned this diagnosis I'd received in college, but there's a couple of people that have said maybe it's not that. I'd been doing, I'd taken psilocybin a few weeks earlier for the first time. So there was this narrative from my college diagnosis from 16 years earlier that it was maybe drug use versus bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so she barely had the context. And here I was going off the rails. And, it was very common to the conditions of mania and psychosis, speaking quickly, messianic superhero delusions. I was laying in bed, I was howling at the moon. I thought alternately I was gonna, I don't know, save the world from a flood like Noah at one point, that I was going to be the American president. Maybe I was Batman. I was having these very, historically, they felt to me like things that I would be ashamed to share. Mm-hmm. And after years of therapy since with my doctor, who I talk about in the book affectionately as Dr. Z, he's like, all of us have a superhero complex. We all have deep down a deep yearning to be all powerful in some way. It's just that in mania, that thought can slip from a fantasy to a perceived reality. Mm-hmm. So totally incoherent. And got up. I wasn't wearing any clothing. I was on some kind of a mission. I was going to run outside, and my now wife and mother-in-law tried to restrain me. They called 911. Got me to the hospital. I went to Bellevue in New York City, which is sort of a infamous, makes it sound bad. I think it's an incredible hospital. They treat a lot of people. I think they treat the most visitors of any kind of any hospital in America, and they have a psychiatric ward and they have a psychiatric emergency room. I spent a week there, and I was finally ready to deal with it. I was finally, I was 36 instead of 20. I understood as I returned to rational thought that, okay, this was, no longer a single point in time, but it was a pattern. When the second time mania came back in such an acute way, it was obvious that I was dealing with bipolar disorder type 1. And I felt like, gosh, it shouldn't take 16 years to accept your diagnosis. Right, which is part of the writing of the book. If you can't accept it the day that it comes, hopefully it's 6 weeks, or 2 weeks, and not 16 years. And so I was finally ready to deal with it, and I was discharged straight into handcuffs. And I was charged by the state of New York with felony and misdemeanor assault from the manic, episode, the violence that both my now wife and mother-in-law experienced. And so that was hard. That was a hard moment. It felt like everything was falling apart, and like on every dimension. I was going to lose this woman who was the first good relationship I felt like I'd been in, someone who actually wanted to be with me, someone who I'd been vulnerable with, someone who knew much of my story and then learned in this really devastating way the fullness of it. Was I going to lose her? Was I going to lose my job? I had 600 employees at the time. I was 9 years into building this startup. There was over $100 million of venture capital that we'd raised. And it felt like if there was press about this, that could have fallen apart. And then I just didn't want to live for 6 months. The depression that so commonly follows the manic episode, was extremely acute. And, as many of you listening in know, it can be risky to take an antidepressant if you have a history of mania, for fear, as my doctor had, of an antidepressant kind of slingshotting me in to another manic episode. So I had 6 months where I didn't really want to live, but I knew I didn't want to give up either. I knew I didn't want to give up. And somehow we got through that. We got through it all. Manuela stayed with me. I didn't lose my job. I started seeing a doctor 2 to 3 times a week. I still do. I took medication like an Olympian. I had like an Olympic training mentality. Like no matter how bad I feel, I'm doing exactly what I'm told. And be transparent about it. But if what's working, what's not working, but if I feel numbed out, I don't care. I'm committed to this regimen. I got really religious about sleep, sleep monitoring. I send a sleep report still every morning to my mom, doctor, and wife and sister. So everyone knows exactly how much I slept, how much REM I've gotten. And we got through it. And then the wild thing was no one knew this had happened. Like 20 people knew how close I'd come to losing everything I cared about.
Mhm.
And so, I think that's normally where we keep these stories, right? We sort of, whatever people don't know, let's not share. Let's
Right.
keep it as secret as we can. And then we kind of went the other route as a family, really, and decided that I would share it.
Wow. So your family has been critical in your recovery. We talk a lot about, and of course, IBPF, we provide a lot of connection for people, and sometimes people don't have that support from their family. So I'm really glad that you did. Obviously, very helpful to you. And speaking of your workplace environment and or position at the time, you had talked about heading into the boardroom after this all took place.
Yeah.
And tell us what happened.
Yeah, no. And on that note of family, I just want to add, I felt so lucky and still do on that dimension, in the psychiatric ward at Bellevue. I don't know, there were probably 30 people on the ward that I was in. And it was heartbreaking later. I didn't understand it at the time, but it was heartbreaking later to observe that only 2 other people had visitors. And in retrospect, I think I know how hard that experience is for anyone, and to have no one coming. And then literally 24 hours after discharge, I was in a holding cell at City Center in New York City. Just basically, it's a jail.
Mhm.
It's a jail underneath a courthouse in Lower Manhattan. And every other person in the holding cell was a person of color, Black and Latino men. And when I came out to stand before the judge, it was the same dynamic. There was almost no one in that courtroom, in terms of other family. And I was the only one who already had counsel, outside counsel. So on every vector, I feel like I've had so much privilege in understanding family, a great doctor, the ability to afford it, legal representation when I needed it. If I was I don't know, a man of color living in the Bronx, I might be dead, And so I think we have these differential outcomes. And so it's hard enough if we're hiding, what we're dealing with it. And so I thought, okay, I guess I can just kind of tuck this privilege away. And the idea behind sharing the story is, let's at least destigmatize it so that we have a better understanding of it. In terms of the board call, another example of it, I set up a call with our board of directors. I had to quickly tell them what had happened. I discovered that it only takes about 60 seconds to tell the details of your most traumatic, the facts of your most traumatic thing. In my mind, it was like an ocean of pain that I had to communicate. I couldn't imagine where to begin a story about what I had experienced in life with bipolar disorder. I had a board call. I was like, I had to handle it like a CEO. And so I wrote down a script. And I basically said, when I was 20, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1. I've been in denial of it for 16 years. I just had a second, what felt like a catastrophic psychotic episode, a manic break. Briefly, here's what a manic episode is. And, during the mania, I struck both my now girlfriend and her mom. And I was arrested and charged upon discharge from the psychiatric ward. So that was kind of like 60 seconds. And I was met by an enormous amount of empathy. The first question was, how's Manuela? Which was it was the right question. And it showed the approach was humane and empathetic. And then I did my best to share what the game plan was and, confirm for everyone, take my medication every day. I'm seeing a doctor twice a week. Here's how I'm doing. I'm not feeling great. I'm feeling quite low. This is a hard moment. And, I understand if you want me to step down or step aside. And in terms of the company, here are some things I'm thinking about to protect the company. And it was incredible. I had, I received the full support, empathy for the situation. And to have a professional group of people walk with me through that. And the same thing for our executive team, the small group of people who knew about it. So it's like that support was coming on all sides. Family, physician, girlfriend, professional family. And like, we still barely got through it, I felt like, with all that support. So I've been very lucky.
So why do you think it took you the 16 years to acknowledge? And what advice maybe would you have for someone who is perhaps struggling with acknowledging a diagnosis? How did you feel? Did it make you feel different, better? Once this acknowledgement took place for you, how did things really pan out? It sounds so far well.
Well, you ask a great question, which is, the 16 intervening years, what was going on? I guess I felt like it was some kind of a stain upon me that I had this issue, that it was a limitation. It meant less was possible. It meant I was different in some toxic way, just those words, bipolar disorder. And we do this thing where we say, right, oh, he is bipolar. It's like, well, no, wait a minute. He has bipolar disorder. We don't say he is cancer. We say he has cancer. And so just the idea that you really are, that illness, the identity and the illness are the same thing, right? And if you just look at the language, I mean, I'm still correcting people on that. Friends, family, it's like,
right.
No, he's bipolar. It's like, no, that's not a thing. Like, he has it. He isn't it. Because to be it would be really bad. To be cancer would suck. He's cancer. Wait, what? And so we've loaded into our language that reflects like our neural pathway, whether we say it or not. Just like, once you hear that about someone, they have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or autism, it's like there's something forever changed about you. You didn't ask for this. It's being presented to you by the universe, and now you are colored by this forever. And also, by the way, here's what it might mean if it, now that you are that. You might have these psychiatric hospitalizations every once in a while. We don't know how often. You have a 20% chance of taking your own life, a 60% chance of trying. There felt like so many reasons that it would be better for it not to be true. And so my fantasy became, well, then it's just not true. And so what can we cling to? And it was this concept of the mushrooms having been the reason for the psychosis. And it just turns out that over the course of the next 16 years, when I did have moments of sharing with mental health professionals or physicians this history, it felt like I was confirming the wrong narrative, which is like, you know what, maybe this was a one-time psychotic break. Maybe it was the drugs. It's possible. You seem like you've been fine for X years since. And so it became a fantasy. That wasn't what happened. And it was easier and harder that way. And so when this all went down in 2016, it was like, okay, great, we can name it. I know exactly what this is. There's a lot of accumulated knowledge about it. There's medications for it. How lucky might I be that there's treatment for this? It was still hard, but it felt totally different to kind of know what it was and to accept it. And I don't want people to have that delay. It's too risky.
Right.
It's not something you can ignore. You know what I mean? It's like a tornado's headed towards your house. You can pretend it's not, but it's best to be in the basement, you know?
Right.
It's best to be trying to insulate yourself from the extremes of the mood disorder. And the beautiful thing is it's eminently something that can be dealt with.
Right. So because you have talked about it being a forever diagnosis, and you just explained, and you're medicated, what other types of therapy and how do you think you have set yourself up for success in terms of managing that potential tornado?
Yeah, so it's twice a week therapy. In my case, it's with a psychiatrist. I think this is something that's hard, is that we have therapists and psychiatrists, and we have to keep two kinds of folks up to speed.
Right.
I've been fortunate to find a psychiatrist, psychopharmacologist who does therapy as well, so that there's just one person, you know, to keep up to speed. Whatever it is, I think, you know, I don't have the luxury of not doing that at least once a week. And two is what's on the schedule. Tuesdays and Fridays, 45 minutes. We do it by Zoom. This is another injustice, is that it's hard to afford it, you know, the out-of-pocket reimbursement, which is a societal problem. No individual can solve that. Something that we have to work on. And I think the impact of folks knowing how widespread this is and how much pain and harm and suffering it causes is a requisite step to the reimbursement rates, approaching the reimbursement rates of physical medical issues. So I'm not suggesting I have the answers on that, but I know that the answers run through candor and transparency. And I feel like, you know, Tuesday rolls around and like, I'd rather not jump on a Zoom and talk to my doctor. I would rather keep doing something I'm enjoying, whether that's work or whatnot, but it's just, I have to, you know what I mean? Like if you're on kidney dialysis, you can't skip.
Right.
If you're on chemotherapy, you can't skip it if that's the right regimen. If you have high blood pressure and you're on medication or high cholesterol, like you've got to do the work. And so, you know, I'll see a doctor, hopefully my doctor, depending on how long he lives, twice a week for the rest of my life. And I do it because I have to, not, you know what I mean? Not because I want to.
So what helps you, I'm sorry, what helps you stay disciplined?
Fear. A healthy level of fear, not paranoia.
Right.
But like I have a healthy respect for bipolar disorder type 1. You know, it's like the Lakers and the Celtics or something. You know, it's like, okay, this is a formidable opponent. And I can't win. You know, it's like, it's never, winning is at the end of life, being like, I died of something else and I lived a long life. And I'm sure I did a lot of things wrong, but I didn't let this thing that I knew about cause harm to other people and to me the way that it might have if I hadn't addressed it. And when my son was born, I remember thinking, I know I'm not going to be a perfect dad, but I don't want this thing that I know about to be the reason. You know, I never want to leave him. I don't want to end my life on his behalf. I want to be present. I don't want to be in bed for months at a time, as severe catatonic depression can do. I'm sure I'll be low again, but let's have that be manageably low. Let's have that be an ebb and a flow, and not something that is a catatonic depression, a severe depression. And I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want any of the things that are possible with bipolar disorder type 1 from my own life experience to be the reason or a reason that I let him down. Let it be something else. Let it be something that I don't see coming, that I can't control for. Not the thing I know I can control for. So that kind of healthy fear and love of others, probably more so than love of myself. I'd say it's like fear, love of others, and then love of myself is unfortunately lower on the list. I wish I could say that was as high. It should be. Maybe it is, right? Maybe that's in a way what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's what motivates me. And, the medication is so critical, right? So I have a daily medication that I take, and then there's another 4 that are kind of in the hopper. They're in the cabinet, and we'll dial them up or down depending on what the situation is. So if I'm kind of going up, there'll be, an antipsychotic that will kind of put down like the higher amplitude of the highs that will come down. If I'm feeling depressed, there's a game plan there to kind of dial in some of this, but keep some of that to keep, within bounds. I've got 2 different approaches to sleep medication if I need it. I'm trying not to use that as a daily rhythm. The medication's key. And then there's all these other factors, like largely abstaining from substances. I can't go all the way, I had a glass of wine last night, but it's not the 20 drinks a week I used to have. It's, for me, it's like 5 or up fewer in a week, ideally 3. Mom, if you're listening, it's no more than 1. And any other drug use is gone, out the window. And then sleep. I cultivate a sleep regimen. Like if I sleep 4 hours as I did, 3 or 4 nights ago, then I know the next night I have to get 7 plus. And if it's a 4 and a 4, then it's kind of like a high alert. There's a little bit of extra medication. So I'm always thinking about like sleep as like credit card debt. If it goes too low, I've got to pay it back. And if it goes too high, in my case, that means I'm going lower mood-wise. So then there's also almost a strategy of like, okay, I've got to not sleep more than 7 hours or 8 hours today to kind of break a sleepy Rip Van Winkle depressive moment.
Right.
And of course, exercise and sunshine and things like that are really good. Those are harder to control for me. I'm in and out of good exercise zones. Nutrition, I spend some time thinking about. So it's kind of this full stack approach. And then I find with my own moods, I try to be transparent with other people about my feelings, not just my doctor. So mainly my wife, and sometimes my coworkers and family, to not bottle things up, just like as a human, to be healthier interpersonally. And that might include being unvarnished about low mood, which historically is hard for me. It's hard for me to tell others that I'm not feeling particularly vibrant, that I'm feeling a bit low, or to just say, I'm feeling depressed. I didn't used to do that. For some reason, I felt like it was some kind of a reflection on me or on them, or not being grateful for my life. And I've learned, well, screw it. Yeah, like you can have a lot of reasons your life, quote unquote, should be great. But if you're feeling depressed, you're feeling depressed. Right. You know what I mean? So you just use the word, and it turns out people understand, and the right people, or people with experience, understand, and it invites their empathy. So those are some of the ingredients.
Yeah, that's such good information. Back to your medication, just curious, how long did it take you to get to that? Sounds like a almost perfect regimen in terms of
2 years. No, it took 2 years of experimentation to figure it out, coming out of 2016. episode. I had another little mini break in 2017. It was terrifying. 13 months later, what I mean by a mini break is I had a psychotic series of moments. I didn't end up getting hospitalized, but I was not well. I'd been up all night. And then, yeah, if you look at the full stack of medications, it was 2 years to get to the regimen that has now for 4 years insulated me from certainly like the high highs and the low lows. And we'll kind of take it. I've talked to my doctor about trying to stay between a 4 and a 7.5 out of 10 every day. Stay out of the 1, 2, 3. Be a little careful with 8 and definitely not 9 and 10. And so I have a lot more days now where I'm like a 5. And my doctor will be like, this is called life.
Right.
5 out of 10. And it can feel boring to someone who has, for me, had unmedicated bipolar disorder. It's boring to be a steady 5, but it turns out that it's healthy to be a steady 5 sometimes.
So glad you touched on that. Yes, I'm so glad.
It's a good thing to have a lot of days we're in the middle of the road.
Yes.
Good thing. And so that's a trade that I've made. I'll take more days at a 5 to avoid the 9s and the 2s. I'll do anything to stay out of Bellevue, and I'll do anything to not want to live, because those two extremes are unacceptable to me. And so if that means I'm a steady 5, we'll take it. And, luckily there are days with the 7s, sometimes the 8s. Those days are allowed. Those peak experiences, as my doctor says, are important. We need to have those beautiful, magical days. We need to have the really good day. But it's just not, let's not have 100 of those.
All in a row.
Yeah, and a lot of the decision making gets worse, at the higher end. And for me, it meant I was drinking. It meant my interpersonal judgment was worse. I was harder to deal with, I think, at work. There's a lot of costliness to being quote unquote, on fire, or whatever you want to call it. It causes a lot of residual damage. And so I'm willing to make that trade of not really any feeling on fire days anymore. No longer feeling off the rails and having kind of these whatever. I'm willing to make that trade. And becoming a parent and becoming a husband, that was all helpful for me. I don't think my son wants me to be on fire. I don't think my wife wants me to be off the rails. I don't think that wasn't good for anyone at the time, except me and my own mind.
Right. Oh, thank you for sharing all that. It's really amazing that you have achieved the 5. I really like that reference. We're going to use that. So talking about the workplace, you have spoken a lot about normalizing disclosure of mental health conditions and perhaps eliminating that particular fear that others might have about someone with a mental health condition being unstable in the workplace. So how have you navigated that, and what advice would you have for others in terms of that?
Yeah, I think first it's important to get to the stability so that when you disclose, you aren't causing immediate worry, or to disclose in advance of the issue, to say, hey, here's a condition that I have. I want to make you aware of it. Disclosing during crisis, I don't recommend. So what that means is, what does that mean ideally? It means we need to be in a good place, taking care of ourselves, and then we need to be transparent when we're in that good place, taking care of ourselves. And I think that inspires confidence. You think, oh, this is someone who knows what their Achilles heel is. They're able to just share it. Wow, I respect this person so much more now. I didn't see that disclosure coming, and they're dealing with it. Those are the ideal conditions. And what that means is we can't hide it because it's going well. Now, if things aren't going well, then you definitely have to share it because everyone's experiencing it. What that then leaves out is a scenario where you're not sharing it at all. If those are the two conditions. What I hear from a lot of people is like, well, how lucky you are that you got to share it. You know, you sold your company. And I think that's sadly true. I think there are going to be organizations where this is a hard thing. And I think it's a moment to say, take care of yourself first. If you feel like your job is at risk, then don't do it. If that's how you feel, but ask yourself, do you want to work somewhere where you feel like that would be the case? Do you want to be in an organization where, I don't know, you're going to get fired? Well, you know, fired is an interesting one because it feels like you've got a pretty good legal case at that point to disclose that you deal with a mental health issue and to be terminated in 2022. I think it's a question of resources to dealing with it. And I'm not saying everyone's in a position to go sue their employer, but if you truly don't feel safe, then maybe you're not working in the right place. And that is something that you can control for and figure out what is an organization where I can go, where I would feel safe. And I think that, I don't know, is it Brene Brown who has this saying about vulnerability, which is it doesn't have to be all the way and it doesn't have to be right at once. And so we have to create the conditions of trust and safety in a relationship that we have with someone that we work with, whether that's a friend or supervisor or HR or the ultimate boss. And only when you feel that trust to disclose. And so put that all together, what does it mean? We've got to take care of ourselves. We've got to find people that we trust, and we've got to tell them what we're dealing with. And I think those are the pillars. Take care of yourself, do the work to get as healthy as you can, surround yourself with people who you can trust with this information, and then share it. And a lot of what I'm hearing, and I have empathy for it, is like, well, I don't know if I can trust. And I said, I agree. I didn't know if I could either.
Right.
But give people a chance.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. So we've got, like with anything in our lives, we've got to take some interpersonal risk. And we do this in our relationships all the time, right?
Right.
Like every relationship is interpersonally risky.
It is.
So, you know, you may not work where you work forever. It's unusual that you're going to be there for the next 30 years. So if part of your path to being fully known and being effective, and I would say the other thing that people maybe don't anticipate is like, not everyone is going to be totally surprised.
Right.
You know, like when I would tell people, hey, I've had this secret for a decade. You know, I had some very close friends and colleagues who were like, you know what I mean? Like I was the last to know because people know who we are. Your average human being is very smart and very clever and very intuitive.
Right.
I know we have different narratives about how dumb people are or whatever. I don't believe it. I think your average person is basically brilliant and people know. So when they hear these things, now I know it's different with trauma. I know it's different with, you know, there are things that are going to be totally surprising. So I'm not saying it's the case for everyone, but I think we have to trust each other more.
Yes, I agree. Tell me about advice you would give to an employer and perhaps some of the things that you've done as an employer to provide accommodations and or allow people to disclose.
Yeah. I think that the first thing we need to do is role model disclosure from senior leadership. So we have to find a way at least once a year to share with the people that we work with and our teams that we're up against something. And it doesn't require a diagnosis. It could be a challenge as a parent. It could be issues with addiction. It could be someone that we've lost. Something that shows, oh, wait, this fill in the blank, CEO, founder, chief financial officer, director of marketing, someone who has influence in the enterprise as a leader just shared something vulnerable about their world and something that makes their world difficult with all of us. It can be in a town hall, it can be a part of an email, finding a way to show it's okay and life sucks for you too. Because it turns out that, and I mean this charitably, life sucks. You know what I mean? Like, it's just hard.
For everyone, right?
It's hard for everyone,
right.
For sure. And so leaders can change an organization by setting the norm that kind of disclosure is encouraged. We don't have to bring it into every meeting. We don't have to bring it into every day, but at some point that can change the conditions on the ground. For people in the team, it's harder. And so we need to create like pathways. And so one pathway is making sure that there's some kind of awareness that's being built and training given to HR professionals and managers. And I know some organizations, because I've had to figure out, well, who does that? And there's a few of those out there. There are a lot of mental health tech companies developing solutions targeting companies to provide these kinds of services. Modern Health, Lyra, there's a number of them now where basically these are resources that companies can provide to their employees to seek help or make a disclosure or share a challenge. They tend to be very underutilized. So for the companies that do invest in it, that do make it a priority, so that's not enough to have it sitting there. There has to be some pathways of encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we have to create cultures where there's friendship. The number one driver of happiness is having a friend at work. And that friend is probably going to be the person you're going to share that with. And so even if it doesn't go through the formal channels, even if your boss isn't role modeling that behavior, even if there isn't a great software solution, I think it's important to spend the energy to find and make a friend. And I think we have work to do in this Zoom era. It's hard to make friends over Zoom.
Yes.
So we've got to reach into that if it is a fully remote environment. And if it's not, we've got to spend time with people like we did in the good old days. I'm sitting in a co-working space in New York at a new startup that I work at where, we decided to be in the office 3 days a week. And the primary goal is so that we can develop friendships, which used to be what we did at work. So these are all imperfect thoughts. There's a question, by the way, in the Q&A. I don't know when, just so you're aware of it, whenever we get to.
Okay. Yeah, I want to validate and the idea of connection and the importance of connection. And you have talked about your incredible family and support system. And as I've mentioned, a lot of people don't have that. So to build those friendships and actually take that risk, be vulnerable and put yourself out there to create those friendships, whether it be online portals that actually lead into more personal relationships outside of those avenues. It really is important to surround yourself with people to help you on your wellness journey. I think that's really critical. And thank you for touching on that in the workplace.
It's everything. Yeah, it's everything. People that we can be honest with, who are reciprocally honest.
Right.
And it doesn't take many. It doesn't take many, right? It can, one good one of those can make all the difference in the world, in life.
You're absolutely right. Let me open up for some questions. Sherry says, thank you so much. My 27-year-old daughter had her first break at 17, thinking maybe it was marijuana. Had a major break in 2016 also. Firmly diagnosed with Bipolar 1. Hospitalized a few times and serious break this past May. Police called. Has been in the hospital since May 28, now in a residential step down for mental health. She's
Yeah.
fought taking meds, not finally closer to acceptance, and now has a great doctor. What would be your personal advice for parents that have watched her not take responsibility for her life because we've been so fearful that she won't die, hurt herself, or hurt someone else?
Yeah, it's the right question. It makes me think of my own parents. My mom is still maybe better now, but for a long time held on to a lot of like, what could I have done differently? It's so hard, I think, Sherry. It's so hard to have someone who's dealing with something that they don't want to accept. It's so hard. And I think, from my experience, when I told some friends I was writing this book, some of whom, one of them, and many of them would say, we haven't talked about this in 20 years. And I would say, well, why do you think that is? And they would say, because you didn't want to talk about it. And I think there is an assumption that we make about people who are dealing with, bipolar disorder, that they're going to be in denial forever. And I think that's not true. We don't know if that's true. And in the aftermath of an episode or the early stages of a diagnosis, it's more likely than not that we're going to fight it. We're going to fight the idea. We're going to fight the treatment. But it doesn't mean that later, and later being the operative word, that can't change. And I'm so happy to hear, Sherry, that for your daughter, that might be evolving. And I can't tell you how grateful she's going to be later on the other side of this for you walking through this with her. And I think there's two things that I think. One is, and I think this is hard for moms, but I'll give you what my wife and mother-in-law said, which is, this is no different than a physical illness. It's no big deal, but you got to see a doctor and take your medication. And so I think accountability has to sit side by side with love. Now, you're a mother, so it is probably unconditional love or close to it, but there should be a condition to the relationship, which is that your daughter needs to be at some point committed to her own self, to her own care. And then side by side with that is some element of boundaries, some element. I don't know how, as a parent, how you do that. I think it's important for you to be in therapy too, to be taking care of yourself, to be working just as hard at your mental health, because everyone needs it, your daughter needs it. And that means you need to make some safe space for you not to be entirely consumed by this, however that's possible. And I think those things are hard. I think accountability is hard, boundaries are hard, patience is hard, but I think she can get there. And it's an endurance sport. It's bipolar disorder is an endurance sport. It's how do we endure and survive and contain. And it sounds like with the step down facility that she's in and the better doctor and the medication that sounds like you're on that journey. So I have so much hope for you and your family and for her.
Yes. And I will add to that, Sherry, that perhaps, as Andy recommended, you finding a therapist and working with a therapist, that they can help you as well find ways to perhaps set those boundaries and conditions that will help your daughter acknowledge and be on that path. So thank you so much for that question. So I have one last thing for you, Andy. You have shared that, we'll read this, manic delusions and entrepreneurial delusions, while not twins, are not unrelated. They're more like distant cousins. The capacity for one doesn't guarantee, but can indicate the capacity for the other. And because we know that approximately 11% of entrepreneurs live with bipolar disorder and 49% live with mental illness, what would your message be to those entrepreneurs, given what you have dealt with in your life, and how could perhaps they do things differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is there's clearly a relationship between creativity and disorder. There's, I don't want to say it's like causation, but there's a correlation, which is to say, it's not a barrier to being an entrepreneur to not have bipolar disorder. You don't need something like this to be successful. But if you do have it, it's very common. It's exceptionally common. And so you're in a cohort where you can just assume that everyone you interact with is not going to be terribly surprised that you're dealing with some type of demon, because we have the cultural references already in advance of my book. Whatever. Steve Jobs ran an advertisement, television advertisement called "Here's to the Crazy Ones," and that was 30 years ago, celebrating this relationship. And I think the worst thing we can do is celebrate or embrace that we're going to be dealing with these issues, and we're going to be problematic, and we're going to, the worst thing we can do is somehow tell ourselves that it's okay to have this issue, whatever it is, and not deal with it. And I think the inverse is true, which is, if you want to be successful at building something that endures, you have to, for large periods of time, be a stable leader. And even if that stability is elusive, or if there are other issues that are challenging for you, depending on whatever you're working through, anxiety, substance abuse, the autism spectrum, there's so many of these things that hyper-index in entrepreneurs. That means we have to be that much more vigilant about these things, because we're not just individuals who are going through our lives. We're responsible for other individuals, right? We're leading teams. We're building teams. And so that's how I think about it. Let's not ignore it. Let's not celebrate it. Let's just deal with it.
Excellent advice. Thank you. I have another question from Savannah. She thanks you again for sharing your story and noticing the stigma with people of color. My father was raised in an underprivileged neighborhood in Chicago and only was diagnosed due to jail/prison. My mission, and especially she works here with IBPF, is to reduce stigma and help raise awareness for others. And she just wanted to acknowledge and thank you for sharing that piece.
Thank you, Savannah. I'm so glad you're doing. Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you're doing that work, and hope to one day hear more about your dad's story.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think we've just about run out of time. I just want to say I'm so grateful. Some really amazing information that you've shared and have been so vulnerable with us. And I'm so glad that you're well and you're sticking to your 5. And we really enjoyed this. And for all, this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on our website for future viewing to share with others. And again, hopefully, maybe we'll have a follow-up with you, Andy, sometime in the near future.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.